got a couple of interesting topics that I know absolutely nothing about this morning.
Ooh.
What are we talking about first?
So first, I want to talk about risk homeostasis. What do you think that is? Just hearing it.
Okay, well, risk, obviously,
Yeah.
that's obvious. But homeostasis? Stasis?
Okay, let me explain. Basically, risk homeostasis, it's a theory that people will have a natural level of risk that they're comfortable with, and the homeostasis bit is about keeping that risk at an equilibrium. And the theory behind that is if you do something quite risky in one part of your life, you'll do something quite low risk in another part to return back to equilibrium. And if you introduce something new that's low risk or high risk, you'll change the risk in some other part of your life just to bring your overall equilibrium of risk back to a normal level.
Is this almost like a principle, a human principle?
Yeah, so there's a lot of research behind it. Now, I bet you're asking, what can we use this for? An example was in a Munich study. What they did is they split the taxi drivers in half, and they gave one half ABS brakes, and the other is just the old braking system. And then for the next 3 years, they monitored the number of accidents that happened.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think happened?
Well, the accident rate should have gone down for the ABS.
Well, interestingly, the accident rates were relatively the same.
Really?
And what was happening was they gave the taxi drivers that had ABS, it meant they could stop faster, which meant they could also drive faster and then stop on a shorter distance.
Right. So did the taxi drivers know that they had the new brakes?
Yeah. Yeah. So they were aware that they had the new brakes. So they were aware that the risk of them crashing due to braking had dropped. So what they did is actually increase risk in other areas of their job, such as taking corners a little bit faster.
Right.
And
Funny us human beings, hey, what we do.
Another example is we have a tendency, if we see a cyclist that isn't wearing a helmet, we'll give them lots of room. But if they are wearing a helmet, we won't give them as much room. And it's a little bit of that overcompensating.
Yeah.
And some of this research actually came about from shuttle Voyager exploding due to the O-rings.
Right. Yeah.
And basically...
What happened there?
So after the launch, one of the O-rings failed. An O-ring is a little rubber ring that sits around like a bolt, and it's supposed to seal it.
Right.
So the air can't escape. And what happened was one deteriorated, and gas was able to leak out and explode one of the fuel boosters on the outside, so the whole thing gave way. What they were doing was they were looking at all the risk built into such a project, and in the end they came down to it at the end that no one was particularly at fault there. It was just a case of it was such a complex system that trivial mistakes, once you add 3 or 4 of them in a line, something's going to go wrong, and that's essentially what happened. No one was acting in a negligible manner.
Yeah.
The O-rings were to specification, and they've been tested before as just a series of events.
Okay, so how does this principle of this what is it, homeostasis?
Yeah, so let's just bring
play?
it back to equilibrium. Another example is, and it's especially relevant to Auckland, and I think they did this in Amsterdam, I forget where, but the more cyclists you have on the road, the less accidents involving cyclists happens. And that's because...
people are more aware, right?
Yeah. So they overcompensate a little bit. And I was particularly reading it from the point of view of innovation. And part of the risk homeostasis model is that a new innovation doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be safer. And part of that is that when we want to overcome a problem, we'll take some small risks in some areas but large risk in others. And just because we've taken a small risk to make a new innovation, maybe we've taken a large risk in another aspect.
I wonder if this can be applied to the fact that the government is raising the driving age to 16 potentially, and then also a 0 alcohol limit.
Yeah. So what are the impacts there?
Yeah.
We're taking some of the risk out of their life. Maybe they'll do something
else. Yeah.
But then again, when you go back to the theory, it's almost saying it doesn't matter what you do because all you're doing is diverting the risk somewhere else. Do you understand?
So naturally, as human beings, we have an
acceptable
propensity towards risk.
Yeah.
We like risk, and so it will pop up somewhere in our lives.
So we each have an acceptable level.
Yeah.
Yours might be higher than mine, or it might be lower.
Right.
And overall, through everything we do, we adjust the level of risk to meet our equilibrium, so we feel safe and comfortable. And when the risk is too high, we feel quite stressed.
Yeah.
So we'll almost panic a little bit to try and bring it back down to a level where we feel comfortable.
So people who go out and do extreme activities, skydiving or the jumping off those cliffs with those wingsuits, like those guys
Batman
have
suits.
So elsewhere in their lives that have pretty low risk.
Probably. Well, we hope so.
Yeah. Interesting. So,
interesting.
That's an interesting concept.
Yeah, it's just interesting
about it.
to think about any system where they say, like, we're going to do this change to fix this problem.
Yeah.
And then they produce enough stats, and then someone will say, yeah, but that's not going to work because of this one thing. And then you realise that it's not going to, or it increases issues in other areas.
Yeah. Second idea for today, Ben.
Parkinson's law. Now, what do you think Parkinson's law? It's got nothing to do with Michael Parkinson.
Anything to do with Parkinson's disease?
No. So Parkinson's law, it basically states that the amount of work will always expand to fill the time allotted. So that if I say to you, look, I want a 200-word essay written, it's due tomorrow.
Absolutely.
You're going to spend the whole day working on it.
I found out this law, I think, of my very first day at school. Yeah.
And then, that's basically it. You expand the work, the amount of time taken to complete a task based on the limitations that you have on it. Or
I procrastinate right until the last minute.
Basically. Yeah. You'll procrastinate because you know that at the end of the day you can do it in the last hour.
Yeah.
If it took 8 hours, you wouldn't procrastinate into those 8 hours.
Yeah.
And it's just this interesting little mechanism whereby you give someone a certain amount of time and you know that they're going to fill it.
Yeah.
And so the question comes, do you shrink that time or do you expand it, or how do you deal with that?
I was always envious of the people who could finish a project a week in advance and hand it in, or just be way ahead of deadline.
Yeah. Well, maybe Parkinson's law from their perspective is the fact that they've got 5 assignments and they need to get that one done so that they can get the next one done. Or maybe they're much better at managing the time and they've created an artificial deadline, which is probably the most likely aspect, whereby they have to get it done at Sunday at 5 o'clock because they've got other assignments to work on.
So do we actually want to do battle against this law?
I think you should acknowledge it. Especially when it comes down to productivity. A lot of people say, well, we're quite productive, we always meet deadlines. Well, that sounds good, but maybe your deadlines are way fleshed out, or maybe they're brought back in. You see this quite often with government and public companies. They'll say the project was a success. Everyone else says, well, it was six months over when you said you were going to do it. Yes, and the argument they'll come back with is, well, the specifications changed, so we met the new deadline.
Right.
And so it's it makes you second guess what people are doing to get to a point of achievement or success.
So putting this in the context of, say, a manager, should a manager always set a deadline at the minimum time rather than the maximum?
Maybe. Well, there are certain aspects where if you pressure people too hard, things are going to fall off or break.
There's risk involved.
Yeah, there's risk involved. But at that point, maybe that's the point where you need to operate to get the objective achieved.
Yeah.
In terms of maybe there is a lot of pressure to achieve it.
Yeah.
It's also interesting from a cost perspective. Quite often, if the cost to achieve a project is directly related to time and you're paying people per hour, you want to get that sweet point where they're not doing it too fast, such as they're making too many mistakes, but you want them to be doing it as fast as they can with making an acceptable level of mistakes. And that almost comes back to that risk homeostasis.
Yeah.
How much risk are you happy to accept within this time frame?
Well, both the two topics really balanced up quite nicely together, I think. Yeah. Ben, the best ideas are free, of course. You can find out more about his ideas at his blog, bwaggy.com, bwaggy.com, and also on Twitter, twitter.com/bwaggy. Thanks,
cool.
Ben.
Thank
See you next time.
Cheers.
A track here from Flight of the Conchords. This is called Angels.